Good evening, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I'm Stephanie Pavlantos. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're moving a little slow tonight. I think we're both very tired this evening.
Yes, busy day.
We have had a busy day, busy week. We are continuing with the Epic of Eden and show our book there by Sandra Richter. And we are on chapter 6 this evening, and we're discussing the whole chapter goes over Noah and Abram. But I gave Stephanie a text about midweek, and I'm like, can we split this up? Because it's a pretty long chapter. So,
yeah. And we don't do well with long chapters. We go long.
Well, last time we ran out of time, and I'm like, no, there's so much good stuff in here. Yes. So, and we've got about 2.5 more chapters. So that should get us through the month of October. We're still trying to decide what we're going to do next. I guess we should make that decision.
Yeah. We might have a couple of guests on before we start.
And that's fine. And listen, I'm going to put a plug for Stephanie's podcast because I was just complimenting her today. Her guest today or this week is just awesome. He is a rabbi. Is he a rabbi?
He doesn't call him. He calls himself a Torah teacher.
Yeah. And he is deep into translation and doing the Aramaic translation, which I thought that was fabulous. And just some of the examples they talked about is just another example of lost in translation. It's not that the Bible's wrong. It's just that there's so many nuances and deeper meanings and clues that the Greek translators didn't get because they were not Hebrew people. And some of it got just lost in the mush of it. And he made a great comment like, we say walk, but we also amble and we stride and we, strut. And so like, what word do we pick? Because we've got one word to, in one language and we've got 5 words in another language. So,
and then you have the speakers, they're using Aramaic, but they're writing in Hebrew and Greek, and so
vice versa, right?
Yeah. So, so you have like a lot of different languages going on, and then they had to choose which words to use.
So say the name of your podcast, make sure everybody understands and goes to it and checks it out.
So it's Grafted Jewish Roots of Christianity. So,
it's a good one.
Yeah.
I told her I liked it so much today. I listened to it twice already. Yesterday morning and this morning on my commute. So it was just so good. Good job. Well done.
Thank you.
So tonight, I kind of call this a podcast, kind of, because that's kind of what we're doing. But we're going to go ahead and jump into our chapter, and we're going to do half. We're only going to talk about Noah this evening. Yeah, because there was a ton, and we both had some extras, just some extra fun things she didn't really go over in the chapter, but, just kind of fun things to know. So we're going to offer some of that as well. So
maybe a few that we just I wasn't quite in tune with, and so taught you.
And so, that's kind of a good point, Stephanie, because we are picking these books and, we're reading through them, and everybody has a different way that they're approaching it. Even Stephanie has a very different background from my, Southern Bible Belt background. And it's not that it's wrong or like heresy or anything, because they're issues that do not matter in salvation. It makes absolutely no difference in grace, the grace that God offers, or how one is saved, or the work that was done on the cross. It's just a matter of how you believe in an angel or not.
Yeah.
So,
and we don't agree 100% with every book we pick, but we pick the books that we agree, 80-90% of the book we agree with, and there might be a section here or a section there that we don't, and that's okay, because we don't throw the whole book out because there's a section we don't agree with.
And you know what, it does make me go and dig a little deeper too, because I like, if there's something I'm not sure about, I will go back to the Bible, I'll reread that area, I'll check it. And it's funny, I taught a class last night, and I said something, and at the end of the class, one of the ladies said, I looked that up and I checked you. And I'm like, you checked me, like, it's okay. Yeah. You too. Like, if you don't understand it or agree with me, or you've been taught a different way,
yes,
please go back to the Bible.
Oh yeah.
And double check what you have learned and why do you believe what you believe, kind of put it up against that. So yeah.
Right. Because we all learn from different
people. We are not offended if you do not agree with us. It is okay. And I don't agree with everything she writes either. So that's okay.
Yes.
All right.
So,
well, chapter
137.
Yep, 137, chapter 6. I don't know. You want to kick us off? We had a few things to bring up.
Sure. So we're this section is called Noah and the Recreational Covenant. Right. So what we see here, and what we'll unpack a little more as she unpacks it, but we had creation in Genesis, and then what we see is a decreation happening in the time of Noah, and then a recreation after that. So she kind of unpacks all that and shows us. But the one thing that I saw here was when she talked about, or this quote from Genesis 6, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And then she goes on to just say every intent of every thought was only evil. And I said that Rabbi David Foreman talks about evil inclinations. That's how it's worded in some texts. And I thought that was interesting because the way he explains it is man trying to create outside of God's kingdom, trying to create their own kingdom and all of this. And so those evil inclinations, those are like evil creations of man. And that was one of the biggest problems that he had, even at the time of like the Tower of Babel. What were they trying to do? They were, there was this evil inclination of wanting to build their own tower, to do things, to build their own country, to build their own kingdom, that kind of thing. So we see the same kind of thing, and it's still going on. I mean, we still try to. I wrote on the bottom of my page, worse than today? ?
I mean, could it have been any worse than it is today?
Even as authors, I mean, what do they want us to do? They want us to build our brand, basically build a kingdom that we are the center of, and people come to us, and people see us as an authority, and they also see us as what we have to offer and want to buy our products. So in a sense, we are building our own kingdoms when you're in the marketing business of authors or whatever it is you may do.
And I have some of the teaching I come from has said that's part of the reason of, part of the sin is rather than being fruitful, multiplying and spreading out and subduing the whole world, they were pausing and building cities. And they were to be tribal. They were to move across the earth. They were not to camp in a place and build a kingdom.
Yeah. And I think even being fruitful and multiply is not just physically multiplying, but spiritually multiplying as well. And when we get caught in our own kingdom, we're not telling anybody about God's kingdom. So. Right.
Exactly. Okay. Well, there was murder, violence, and corruption, which characterized Noah's world. And she talks a little bit about how much time has passed, and we don't have an exact. So she's really clear. We don't have an exact, but she did make the point that humanity has had enough time to multiply, civilize, develop, deteriorate, and decay. This sort of expansion and corruption takes time. So a pretty good chunk of time, right? Then she introduced us to a gentleman by the name of Noah.
Right.
And I've done a little bit of study on Noah in the past, and his name does mean rest. It is from a root word that is actually, it's Noach is how you pronounce it in Hebrew. It's not Noah, but it's the CH sound. And it's from the root of en-vichet, nevach. Noah. And it's interesting to listen to what rest means. If you look at the word picture of just his name, nun is life and action, and chet is enclosed. And so, rest comes when your life is enclosed and secure. And the root, the 3-word root, is nun, which is life, vav, which is a nail, and chet, which is the fence. So rest only comes when you are secure and enclosed. So I think that's kind of an interesting look at the word rest. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And you can even think of that and how it pertains to the ark.
You're right. You're enclosed, and you're at rest when you're enclosed. Yeah.
And they really, I mean, I'm sure that they had work to do. They had to make their own food and they had to feed animals, but they weren't working the ground, making wine, collecting water. I mean, that was all done. So now it was just rest and wait out the judgment that was happening.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people think that, I'm going to look at Noah because there is a line that says, Noah was righteous. And so I have heard it so many times where people would say, well, God looked across the world and he was the only righteous man he could find. So that's why Noah got picked. But we have to remember that Noah was a man, and Noah had sin, right? Because the original Adam sinned, the sin nature was definitely within him. And it says Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And if you actually look at Genesis 6 and go down a little bit more, you see salvation, because found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That word favor is the word chen, which is grace. And here's something really interesting. Noah's name is spelled, if you spell Noah's name backwards, it's hen. It's het nun, which is Noah was nun het. And so hen is loving kindness. It's favor. It's grace. It's God's grace. It's one of those words that just has a plethora of meanings and indications. And so if you look at those verses, Noah found God's grace, and then he walked with him. It says he walked with him. And so what are we to do as believers when we find grace? We walk with God, and then only then we are counted righteous. And so if you look at the verses in that passage, that's exactly what happens. He finds grace, he walks with God, and only then he is found righteous.
Right. So, and it's interesting when you look at his father, Lamech, or Lamech, I guess.
Lamech, yeah.
And when he named Noah, he assumed, or he gave him the name because they would have a rest from the curse. That's how he actually thought.
That's what they were thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. That this curse that started with Adam would be done with through Noah. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you don't realize that, maybe why they got the name they did, but there was in the way they thought, they thought maybe the curse will be over, because obviously they recognized that this curse was difficult. The ground was cursed. And we talked about that last week. Mm-hmm. But I do like this one quote where she says, Noah's role in this cosmic drama will be to rescue enough of the created order that a new start is possible, and to reintroduce Adam to their creator.
Right.
And I thought that was cool. Just the way she put that. But
right.
And you wanted to talk about Matthew 24, right?
A little bit, yeah. We can go a little bit further because I think she brings it up at the end again. So.
Oh, okay. Well, it's right here on 130.
Yeah. Well, and she says, yeah, it's on the bottom of page 130. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she was talking about how humanity had enough time to make itself corrupt. I guess we can talk about it here. That's fine. I wanted to actually read the section that she was referring to because she mentioned it twice in the chapter.
Okay.
It's Matthew 24, 37 through 39. So it says, for coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the man be. There'll be one man in the field and one man taken, and one man will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, and one will be left. And so there's two ways to look at it. And I've heard it taught so many times, like when the Son of Man comes, he's going to take you away. Like that's a picture and image of the rapture and how the Son of Man will come and you'll be taken away. But if you're looking at it and we look at it and it clearly says as the days of Noah. So there's two parts to that too. We're going to be eating and drinking and living our best life and like all the way up to either the rapture or destruction. Like we'll wake up one morning and not even realize that today could be the day because we are so distracted with our lives. Or if it is like the days of Noah, think about it. Those that were taken away were the ones destroyed. They were swept away, took away, taken, and they didn't make it. And the ones that remained would be the ones in the ark and the ones that were in rest and in security. So, I've heard a lot of pastors say, well, this is the rapture and, you don't be left in the field. But I'm like, you might want to be left in the field because there's two ways to look at this. It could be those that are taken away or taken to destruction. Yeah.
Right. The judgment happens on those who are swept away.
Exactly. So Noah goes in the boat, and we talked a little bit about too. She really spent a lot of time, several pages, about the flood narrative in other cultures, and she specifically talked about Gilgamesh several times. When I was in seminary, I had a book, and I was going to look at it. I was going to try to find it and read like the Gilgamesh account of the flood. I'm sorry I don't have that. If I find it, I'll read it tomorrow or next week. But I looked it up. There's actually over 200 civilizations that have a flood narrative.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not, and in one way or the other, either a worldwide flood, a localized flood, a flood of destruction, or a flood of just, in their area. So, but there's a lot out there. But she made
that movie that came out a few years ago. Noah's.
That was so hokey.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even watch it because I knew they were going to butcher it. But it was supposed to be put together with all these flood stories. Like every nation all over the world has a flood story. So they kind of just took the high points of each story and put them all together in one.
Yeah, it was kind of goofy.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting too, in most stories, there's a big boat that's built, or the gathering of the animals, or the saving of the animals, and saving of the families and the animal kingdoms of the world. She made a really good point. And I don't know if you want to expound on this any bit, but it really marks a separation of eras. And she kind of says this a few times in the chapter. For the pagan Mesopotamian Gilgamesh society, it's the end of the golden age of man, and then the gods wipe them out, with the ferocious sea, and now we're struggling, since then. But she made a really good point. Like it was not the golden age, just because they were eating and drinking and being merry. It was actually the worst it could possibly get, and creation needed to be undone. So.
It did. Yeah, you're right. Because some of their points of view were just, they didn't even, I don't know, maybe they just wanted to make it sound better than it was, but they kind of just thought it was like the golden age. But I found it interesting because she talks about it took many generations for the death resident in our bodies to reproduce itself such that it overcame the perfection of our original state.
Interesting.
So she was talking about how, going back to the lifespan, you know, because everybody sees the 120, but I know I'm jumping ahead there, but I thought that was an interesting quote, and I'll wait to jump into that. But how they all saw it, and that this whole time pre-flood was building up to just an unsurmountable amount of evil, and then after, it was kind of like not just getting rid of the evil, but God knew that they weren't going to change that much. But then he gave them, but it was kind of like, because they had all these years of life, they had longer time to be evil. And I found that interesting, because it's true. The longer you live, the longer you can think of up more ways to be evil. And he's like, no, I have to shorten their lives, or I have to shorten their time. And so, did you want me to go into that right now?
Yeah, if you want to, go ahead. Because go ahead.
So a lot of people see the 120 years, when God says, I've given man 120 years. They think of it. I've read books where Noah had 120 years to make the ark.
I've heard that.
Others believe no, man's timeline, his or lifespan now is only 120 years. But the third thing that I've heard was that in God's time, he deals with sevens. So we see this in Daniel, the 7 weeks of years. We see counting the Omer, 7 days, 7 weeks, 7, all these sevens. And then we see the Jubilee is 49 years and that kind of thing. And so, and those are all multiple sevens. So what was brought up, it was 120 Jubilees. And it wasn't about your age or my age. It was about the time that man had left on this earth, because he wasn't going to allow us to keep getting more evil. So he put a time limit on how long man would be on the earth.
Right. We added it up. We did the math before we went on air, and it was 5,880 years roughly.
Instead of like the 6,000, because we think in thousands and tens, right. So it's 10. But he thinks in base 7. So it's interesting.
And I have to say too, and I'll get into this a little bit. Numbers are big in this passage. 8 is referenced, 40 is referenced, and 7s are referenced, and 2s are referenced. So you have, and it's repetitive. I mean, it's over and over and over again, and multiples of those numbers are over and over and over again. So that could be a clue for us to understand, because the numbers that are cited they are very specific and have very specific meanings.
Right.
And then today we are in 5784 now on the Hebrew calendar. So, and
there's some slight differences in I've heard a couple of times by some people I really respect that because of the Jewish calendar, not including Jesus' life, but Jesus was very much about marking a time in the calendar. Right. And so that the calendar is actually behind because they left out some things. So it's just interesting. There's lots of talks about, the more people I talk about, the more people who are like, oh yeah, some people go, talk about the calendar so much. And I find it interesting, but it was only because I have come to know certain people who are very passionate about the calendar. So I hear them talk about it, but but it's there's a lot we don't know, right?
No. And that kind of goes under what we were just talking about earlier. We don't know. And this is not a grace question. This is not a salvation question. Right. This is not a doctrine even. It's just a teaching, and
wait and see kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to find out. Well, we've got a lot of questions. So, we'll wait and see. All right. So the waters, he is told to gather 2 kinds of clean animals and 7 kinds.
Sorry, but I don't think people realize that Noah already had an idea of clean animals.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So we don't really talk about that. Yeah, because we don't, we have seen that, yes, even Adam understood his priestly duties, and even that mankind had a right or wrong. They understood the Sabbath. I mean, there were Torah principles in place, whether or not Torah was written down. And so I think that's a great point of clean or unclean. And he knew the difference. And there's a different amount. So we're supposed to get 7. Let's see if I can remember. 7 of the clean.
Right.
Okay. And 2 of the unclean. And so I think 7 is a complete number. And 2, I didn't do a whole lot on 2s.
Well, 2 for male and female, I would imagine, right?
So yeah, that would be the unclean. And then 8 people were saved. Mm-hmm. And we'll continue on with some other numbers. So the flood waters. So this is the decreation, because if you read through it, the earth flooded almost in the same order that it was created. So the first thing that happened in creation was, the waters were separated and they were put within boundaries. The upper waters and the lower waters were separated. They were gathered and separated. And so she even had a really nice picture in there of the floodgates of the top, the dome or the firmament coming down. The windows were opened and the flood waters came through, and then the bursting up. And so we're always taught it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, actually it didn't. That's not what happened. I did a little bit of I did a word nerd calendar search here. It says in the second month, and I thought, okay, well, let's just pretend like we're going to do it on our own calendar. Like I'll lay this over our calendar, even though the second month is a very different month than Hebrew month. But on February 17th, we'll just do it with our calendar. It started to rain, but he was still gathering the animals. So for 40 days, it rained as he continued to make preparations. And they were into the ark, and then God closed the ark, and then they were in the ark for another 40 days before it lifted off the ground. And so for 40 days, the floodgates above and the floodgates below are just filling the world. And so 80 days before the ark even lifted, it didn't even lift yet. The ark lifted, and then it continued, and it floated for a good 150 days.
Right.
And then the next date that was given, I just continued on. July 17th is when the rain stopped, basically. And so from July until October, it floated around. It would just circumnavigated floating around. Mm-hmm. And then finally in October 1st, it would have landed on the top of a mountain. And for 40 days, the water would have receded. And at that 40 days, he sent out a raven. And I mentioned this to Stephanie. The raven didn't come back, but I don't think it makes sense that it wouldn't, because a raven is a scavenger bird. And think of all the destruction and dead bodies that it was free to graze on. And so a raven wouldn't come back. And then 7 days later, a dove was released. And then 7 days later, a dove was released. And actually, in some of the other civilization epic narratives of the flood, they even discuss releasing a dove and a raven. So
I remember.
The theme is repeated. So if you add all of that up, so then the water dried. We finally get down to January 1st, like we're more than a year. The water finally dried. And then finally, February 27th, which would have been a year and 10 days, give or take, they finally left the ark. So it was more than a year. The flood lasted more than a year, or they were in the boat more than a year.
Right. So, in the ark, yes. And the interesting thing is when the Bible mentions firmament, that word, it means dome as well. It can be translated as dome, because when we see blue skies, we think clear, but they saw it as kind of a dome that held back the waters. Right. And it's just a very interesting thought, but it's very different than what we think of today. And so it wasn't about, because they didn't experience much rain in those days. And so that they looked at this dome type of thing that was holding back waters. And you could go into, like they didn't have any understanding of the earth and the shape of the earth and all of that. And so to them, it was just a dome there that held back water. But
and the sea was a terrible place. The sea was this very scary.
Oh, yeah. So it was the abyss kind of thing that was the chaos. And here it is. It's the waters below were the chaos that every Hebrew feared. Waters above as originally part of the primordial deep, but placed in the heavens and restrained by the firmament is what she writes. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I also went through and I got the verses of the recreation because now here we are. And she made her wonderful. I really, really loved when she did the parallel of what is commanded of Noah, right? And I'll have to find that. If you want to look at that, if you want to find that page, I'll talk about the parallel verses. But in 6:1, it says the wind passed over the earth. And then in Genesis 1:2, it says the Spirit moved over the waters. And so the water started subsiding because the Spirit and the wind blew over it. And so we've got the chaos of the waters and the chaos and everything in it. So, we have the same action. And then in Genesis 1:6, it talks about the water separating the top and the bottom. The uppers and the lowers. And then in 8:2, it talks about the fountains of the great floodgates were closed. So again, we have the separation. We have it's skipping around a tiny bit, but in 8:7, we have the birds in the air. The birds were released. He released the birds to go back into the air, and the raven and the dove. And in 1:20, that's when the waters had fish, teemed with fish, and the skies had the birds of the sky. And then in 8:11, it talks about land and trees being there. And in Genesis 1:9, dry land appeared. Isn't that interesting too? Yeah. The birds were released even before
the dry land.
Yeah. And then I think that's about where I got to the end.
You kind of see the vineyard and the animals being released. So that kind of goes in with the plants and the animals. Stay.
And then God gave Noah a command. And
we're on one. So she started the recreation on 147 and then the top of 148. And so just to enter that, or before the Genesis 9:1-17, it says, thus God began afresh with his fallen children. The vehicle of this fresh start being God's recreational covenant with Noah. So she said, look at the language. So do you want me to read one? You read the other and compare the language?
Good. If you want to just take it, that's fine. Because I think I'm looking back a page to see if there's anything else we missed.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
So 148, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground and all fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all of it to you as I gave the green plant. Only you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And she said, can you hear the words of echo that echo Eden? And then here's Genesis 1. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and every living thing that moves on the earth. Then he said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. To every beast of the earth and to every bird in the sky and everything that moves on the earth with life, I have given green plant for food. And it was so. So the same thing with the fruit, be fruitful and multiply, which we talked about, but where with Noah, he also gave the beast of the field, the animals, and of course the clean animals, which he already understood. We said But in Eden, it was only the trees. But it was not only if you caught that, I mean, it wasn't just mankind who would eat the fruit or the plants of the ground. It would be all beasts, all animals, all birds, everything that creeped on the ground. And I find that interesting because there were no carnivores. Everything was herbivore. And so then with Noah, he allowed man to become a carnivore and animals to become carnivores.
Right. I went through and I just because the Chad Bird teaches us to look for the Eden language. And so I dug a little deeper, and I know you can't see it, but I went ahead and I highlighted, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. But I have beasts of the earth, birds, creeps on the ground, fish. Into your hand they are given. And almost every day of creation is identified. Like it's the whole entire recreation process. So like birds and fish and seed and plant and green plants and the earth and ground and almost every day, some aspect of every day of creation is mentioned. So we've got a complete recreation for it. I thought that was good. And we talked a little bit before we came on about how it's given a fear, how the fear of you and the terror of you will be in every beast of the earth and every bird of the sky. And she made a really good point. It says, whereas the covenant of Eden, the gift of dominion whereas in the covenant of Eden, you had the gift of dominion. Okay. With Noah, the gift is fear, which I thought, well, that's not really a gift, but think about it. And in all likelihood, this fear is not given to protect humanity from the raging wildlife, but to protect the vulnerable wildlife from their insatiable predator, humanity. And I thought, that one hurts a little bit, but she's not wrong.
Yeah. And she's not wrong. And we talked about that before the show, and I've mentioned that to other people since that, because, we always take it that they were going to fear us, but not because we have dominion, but because God knew how evil we were and that we would wipe them out if we'd given the chance.
Yeah. And
we would wipe out every animal.
We've begun. Yeah. We've come close. We have done that on a few animals, and we've come close on a few other animals. So yeah.
Yes. And when we start talking about covenant, it's very interesting because we'll see another covenant here, but the covenant was with all of creation, every beast, every bird, every fish, not just man. And I find that it's very interesting to me as well, because we don't always think about it, that he made it with the whole, every living thing on creation. In creation.
So Noah leaves the ark and he makes an offering. He takes his clean animals and he makes an offering of them. I think there's a lot packed into that. He also, I set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign for a covenant between man and earth to remember. And we talked about this a little before as well. The word rainbow actually isn't in the text. We've inserted that word, but it's just the word bow. And if you were to look it up, you would see that it's the same word bow that's always used to describe a weapon of war. The warriors carried bows. It's the same word throughout the Bible. And so the bow is set in the sky. And if you know about hunting and using a bow, the business end where the arrow points to is pointing up. And so the wrath of God is again facing him, and it's not pointed towards the earth. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if you want to covenant a little bit with that one.
Yeah. So when every covenant, man-made covenant, was always about that the wrath of the king would be on the lesser person within the covenant. So if it was a king and a vassal, or a more powerful king with a lower king, if anything was broken, any covenant was broken, then it was the death or the pain or the expulsion of the lesser person, the smaller, lesser king or vassal or servant. And but every time God makes a covenant, he puts himself on the line, so to speak. He's the one that the wrath will come on. And we see that in the person, of course, of Jesus, the Messiah. So he took the wrath of God, and we see that again in the Abraham covenant as well, which I won't skip ahead to, but we see both of these covenants, and that's why I feel like they're in the same chapter, because the covenant promises the wrath to go on the higher person in the covenant. So and that's of course God. But it's very I don't know. I just don't think we think about that enough. I think covenant is so awesome to understand and learn, and she does an excellent job at explaining the covenant in this book.
I agree, and I think we just skimmed through things so quickly without really meditating on even just these little details about the rainbow facing up, or here's something else to think about too. We call it a rainbow, right? And think of all the colors that are involved. But the only place the rainbow is in, the word rainbow is in the Bible, is in, I want to say Revelation. It's described in Revelation at the throne of God. The throne of God has a rainbow arcing over it. And so even a little detail like that is just a remembrance of, you know, the throne of God.
Yeah, and I think that God, which is why when we even see ahead in Moses and the colors, the stones that he wore on the high priest, it was all to remember. And then what does God do? He puts the rainbow around his throne to remember his own covenant. There has to be a remembrance of the covenant. And that's what the Torah is. That's what the word of God is, to remember, for us to remember the covenant, because he's writing it in the sky. He's putting it on his throne. He's making sure he doesn't forget, and he doesn't want us to forget either.
I agree. One final thing, and then we'll move on to some of the names. I talked about the numbers, and number 7 is the number of complete and perfection. And so we saw that in the number of days that took place between events in the flood. Number 8, that's the number of people that were spared on the boat, or on the ark. But number 8 is the number of grace. It always references renewal and a new cycle. So, we'll have 7 days, and then, we always think of a week being 7 days, but honestly, day number 8 is the beginning of a next cycle. And so 8 represents that new cycle and grace and renewal. And 40
represents the Messiah sometimes. Go ahead.
And 40 always represents a period of testing and again renewing and testing. So
we talked about that a little bit last week too, about the 40 years. So
we've got numbers and a lot of little clues and details to look at that we go over, and both Stephanie and I decorated our babies' rooms with Noah's Ark.
Yep.
And
I had twins, so it was kind of convenient.
2 by 2, right? I had a happy Noah, but if we really pause and think about it, Noah lost his family. He lost his tribe, and his people group was completely and utterly destroyed. There are family members and people that are mentioned in those generations that we read about in the Bible. Many of them were still alive when Noah went into the ark, and they were swept away. They were taken. So
and we don't think about, like you mentioned, you use the word carnage, but they find fossils of whales, miles inland. They find fossils of elephants near water. They find fossils of animals. So you could just imagine that when that ark came to rest and they got off, there would have been, far inland and on mountains, animals resting there, dying or dead, I should say. And then not to mention the people of the world. You just can't even imagine how difficult that could have been to see just everything on the planet is dead except for us 8 people. Right. It's just unbelievable.
Right. So do you want to go into it a little bit with the names? Because we do have his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Mm-hmm. So Shem means, like, often people call God Hashem,
and, right.
And so that means name. So he will be, this tribe will be the people of God's name, in a sense. It'll be the people of the name. So these are the people that we see becoming Israel. Shem. Japheth, he will become the numerous Gentile peoples living north of Canaan. So these are, and that his name means to make spacious. And so that basically feel like people have put it together with, it's connected to a large territory. So, and basically that's, if you think of large territories, even today, Gentiles take up all the large territories, right? And then you've got this little piece of real estate that Israel lives on. And then the children of Ham, and then, of course, his son Canaan, means to have to submit, to be humbled. And I was once told that Ham, they believe that Ham, even was parts of Africa and parts of, all of that area there. And so that, it was just kind of interesting that where they kind of show up, where each of these 3 sons kind of moved to. And it said, that they would kind of be humbled and have to submit. So it almost sounds like, that they would be a slave of another son or something like that. But it's interesting because then, of course, before we leave this section, what did he do? Why did he curse Canaan? And because, the whole story about Ham looking at his father's nakedness. It's interesting because there's different views on that. I've heard a Bima podcast talk about it dealing with castration. I thought that was interesting. But Leviticus talks about a husband's nakedness or a man's nakedness as being his wife. So there's actually probably something more to do with that he did something to his mother. There's probably a bad relationship there that and because he knew it as soon as he woke up. So he knew something had happened as soon as he woke up. He didn't have to be told. He knew. So it's kind of interesting the way that terminology is used. But because of it, he curses Ham's son. So, and not Ham. So
interesting. And it does go into where these people groups spread out. The big map that I have is done by colors according to each son. And so you're able to see what people groups developed from each of them. And Stephen has a great comment. You kind of talked about this. Shem's name means name, and it's appropriate for those who would bear the name because ultimately the Jewish people came from that son, and that would be the root of Jesus, the root of the tree for Jesus. So
yeah, and it's interesting because of course Ham and Japheth were probably all the Gentile races. So
well, she finishes off with a discussion of the Nephilim. She kind of goes back a little bit. I will say I really, really appreciated how, she says that, you got to remember there were no breaks in the Bible. So we don't know when certain chapters start and stop. And I'm trying to turn back into Genesis. There's a part, where we're introduced to, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the Son of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them and they were mighty men who were old, men of renown. And she suggests that there should probably be a break there and that was like the wrap up verses for the Adam age, the Adamic age.
Yeah.
That the men of renown, and it's kind of where you get the idea of the glory days or the golden era before the flood. That was the last of the great men, the great warriors. They do talk about the mighty men of valor, and how that is a reference to people who are war, gladiators, kind of victorious. I always think of the Vikings, kind of that kind of mentality and attitude, and that, even the men of renown, you hear that word a lot, and it's, you understand, like you're probably talking about people, great warriors and the men of renown. And if you think about even coming forward, thinking of all the literature that we have, Odysseus, and she even mentions, and I talked about it too, the timing of Hercules and Samson are very similar in time. And so it's not a hard reach for mythology to come up with this myth, men of renown, Hercules, or the Odyssey, or, these were great men of renown. Beowulf, I taught Beowulf in high school all the time. And he was a great man of renown. And it's always warriors, it's always talked about warriors. Right. And then she suggests that then the Lord saw the wickedness. So that's like the introduction of now the Noah story. So we always take that section as like a preface to the Noah story, and how like, oh, the Nephilim are here on the earth, and that's why God had to destroy the earth. But if it's separated at a different point, it makes sense. Like the wickedness is why God destroyed the earth. So.
But then you can't, this is where I kind of disagree with her, but it's because like we actually bought the book of Enoch, and and there was a time in our history where and I still hear that many especially Messianic Jews felt that should have been canonized, and but the Catholic Church refused and didn't want that, so there was a disagreement between these groups of people. But it's an interesting book, and they do believe that this is a true rendering of things that happened outside of the Bible, or outside of the time that the Bible goes through, in a sense. And I don't mean outside of all time, but outside of some of the settings in the Bible, so we don't see the background of what's happening. But they do believe that the Nephilim were the physical union of the fallen, because she even says that the word Nephilim comes from the word Nephel, which means to fall, and that's where they get, these are the fallen angels. Right. And then so there's lots of different views on it, and we don't have time to discuss them all, but so it's, but she does make good points.
She said there's like no description of angels having sexual reproductive parts. So,
well, it says that they wouldn't marry, and I happen to think about that. It's like it should say they wouldn't marry,
right?
But it doesn't necessarily. But she did say it's kind of more like she believed that it was they couldn't copulate or reproduce. So, so just interesting. But she gives about 4 different points of view.
Yep, she does, and I like that. I appreciate that. She kind of goes through all of it, and who knows? I mean, I had heard most. I think almost all of them. I had heard almost all of them. So
again, it goes back to what you're taught and what you've been. How it looks like, and I've had different pastors even in my life that told different explanations of that. So
well, I'm not going to fall on the sword, which is one description she gives of the Nephilim. I'm not going to fall on a sword over this one.
No, it's not worth it, because it's not about our salvation. It's not worth that.
Right. Linda mentioned the Book of Wisdom by Leon Cass, and I've read that book, and he's got a really good study. It's just been a very long time since I've read that one, but it's a great book. It is written very much. It's 100% Jewish perspective commentary on Genesis.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good one. So, yeah.
I'll put that down somewhere. Write that down so I don't forget.
That's right. Well, I think we have exhausted Noah. We'll go ahead and continue with the second part of the chapter next week, Abraham. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we'll be. I was a little worried because I know you can find a lot on Noah, but I'm like, oh, I really hope we have enough to cover on Abraham for an hour. So
I think we will. I think. Yeah, because even like there's stuff written about Abraham and that's the thing. I mean, there's lots of like, if we could even talk, just to mention, like there's different Bibles in different countries that have more books than ours has, right. Here in the United States. And so when you start looking at some of the stories and some of the books in some of those stories, and the stories they tell, some are historical. Some, there's a whole group of books that are kind of off the wall. They don't really pay any mind to those, but there are some books out there that some countries have. Like we have 66, and then there's like Ethiopia has like 18 more. Another country has 30 more. I mean, it's really wild to think, but there's stories. And there's stories about Abraham in some of these books. And I've heard those, kind of some of those books fill in historical holes that we find in the Bible. Sorry, elongated that. But yeah, so just interesting points of view that we could look at.
All right. Well, we will continue. I think we have about a minute or two. So any questions from our viewers? I think we have a moment just to take that. We'll just continue with chapter 6 next week. I don't see anything else back there. Thank you.
And we're in the very end we're getting the last weekend of Sukkot. So if you're doing that, happy.
That's right. Yeah. Sukkot, when does it officially end, Stephanie? Is tonight?
The 8th day is Saturday. The 8th day is Saturday. So tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and bring us out. And we just thank you guys for joining us this evening. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Have a wonderful, restful Sabbath tomorrow, you guys. Thank you for joining us.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.